Now let me give you an example. There are some things that we presuppose without, number one, evidence, and number two, we don't question it. Let me give you an example. Consciousness is one example. We presuppose consciousness. Number two is rationality. Number three is logic. Number four is mathematics. Number five, especially when you're doing things like the scientific method, is the validity of the scientific method itself.
Yeah.
Number six, when you're speaking right now, when we're speaking, we presuppose time is a past tense.
Not a microphone.
There you go.
What's going on here?
You're
going to have one.
I'm alright.
You sure? Okay.
What is the? Just out of interest, just what's the?
They put it up on various websites.
Like what?
We'll give you the links.
I don't mind knowing the links. But like, what is the website? Just out of interest.
We just have discussions, and that's why some people, they like them, so they put them online. Simple thing.
You've got 4 microphones.
Yeah, different channels.
Is it all different channels?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not I'm not like exactly sort of a force to be authority. So
I know.
I don't represent atheism.
I don't think I'm an authority.
Just for the sake of the
we're having a discussion. It's Bill, isn't it? Sam and Bill.
Yeah, great.
Look, what I'm saying is this. I mean, atheism, if you look at the etymological root, comes from 2 words. A, meaning without, and theism, meaning God. So atheism is a lack of belief in God. And in philosophy, they usually compartmentalize atheists into 2 different strands. Negative atheists and positive atheists. Now, it seems like you guys are negative atheists. In other words, you are atheists as a result of a lack of belief, rather than believing that you have evidence for the non-existence of God.
Yeah, so I don't think it's really possible to disprove the existence of God completely. You've read The God Delusion. There's a scale of 1 to 7 in terms of, 1 is absolute, I know there is a God, 7 there is absolute, there is no God.
Yeah.
I'd say I'm, sort of 5 or 6.
And you know what's really interesting is that Richard Dawkins himself, he refers to, in many interviews, he talks about deism being a tenable alternative to theism. So the idea of a creator, an intelligence that has created the universe, but then is separate from the universe, is not personal in its nature. He sees that as a non-ridiculous type of claim, which is possible, tenable.
I think he said something about in terms of the way the universe is. I think perfect's the wrong word, but the way that the gravity is just the right amount where the cells and the atoms and molecules hold together. It's not too much if they won't completely implode, but they also don't explode either. There's something that's kind of perfect about the way that everything has formed and it has been made. So I think he says that is interesting that has happened. Yes. I'm not sure if he says that there is some sort of
no, he doesn't say he believes in deism.
Something with a conscious being.
There was one interview I had with an interviewer. I'm not sure his name is Bill something. It's one of the Jewish interviews in America, and he was basically asked. He actually explicitly said, an intelligence that's outside of the universe. It's not ridiculous to presuppose that kind of intelligence could have created the universe, could have laid the laws within the universe. Now look, atheists usually have different kinds of explanatory mechanisms for explaining why it is that the universe is so finely tuned. One of those is the multiverse theory. Is that something you guys subscribe to yourself?
Again, as not a speaker of authority, it's not something I've read briefly about it. I'm aware of the theory, but I couldn't really give much information on it. About you.
Again, it's pretty much exactly the same as at least myself. Theory about religions.
Okay. Speculative.
It's speculative.
Right.
Everyone, you can write pages and pages about it, but realistically, when it comes down to hard facts and being shown one way or the other, struggle to, in any way or sense, sort of say, yes, I know, that is real, I believe that is true.
Right, so let me ask you a question. What I was going to ask you was, now, if I say to you that as human beings, we're rational, sentient beings, yeah? And one of the things that means is that we're able to do deduction of some sorts. Would you accept deduction in the form of syllogism or otherwise as a means of deriving truth in this universe.
Yes, but deductions are based on prior knowledge that you've acquired already.
Yeah.
You deduce something based on something you already know.
Pardon? Say again?
All deductions that you make are based on things that you already know to be true, that you've already experienced.
Yeah, so that would have to be in the premises.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Would you accept that? So what I was going to say to you is that, look, I'm sure you guys have heard of the cosmological argument. I'm not sure if you've heard of this or not. Have you heard of the cosmological argument?
In terms of the Big Bang?
The Kalam cosmological argument. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause.
Okay, so yeah, I don't agree with there is a cause for the universe or like a reason for it. No.
Okay, no, but that's fine.
Oh, you mean it's like a trigger, like something
No,
that actually creates
a cause just means an entity, a thing outside of the scope of the universe.
I see.
So if I say everything that begins to exist has a cause, is that problematic?
See, this is where you're getting into the realms of things that I don't think anyone, apart from possibly religious people, pretend to know about.
Well, look, Leibniz was.
I'm fairly certain that no scientist will pretend to know how the universe came about.
Yeah, all right.
And certainly I agree with that.
That's fine.
I don't know.
No, I mean,
but I don't. But of course, there is a possibility that there is an intelligent being outside the universe.
But that's not what I'm saying here. All I'm saying is that the cosmological argument works in the following way. Yeah, they say that everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe had a cause. That's the cosmological argument. Sure. Okay, we're not saying anything about God. We're just saying a cause of some sort.
Why do we have to understand that it had a point where it said it is now in existence? There's no reason why we can't say that it has always existed.
Do you believe that the universe always existed?
Yeah, I don't think that there would have been anything.
Because
when people say there was the Big Bang, what was there before that?
Okay.
There would have been something there.
So do you believe in the Big Bang? If you believe in the Big Bang, that's a scientific model which actually presupposes the beginning of the universe.
No, I don't think it does. I think there's the way that you're describing it is that there's only been one Big Bang.
We are atheists.
The current Big Bang has made our current state of matter. There's nothing to suggest that there hasn't been an infinite number of Big Bangs.
Okay, so you believe in
back into an infinite amount of time.
So you believe that there's an infinite amount of Big Bangs, all of which started or initiated the same universe or different universes?
What is the universe? That's the question. What is the universe?
The universe is that all that which is being all that which we can see with celestial bodies above us, basically, yeah, and which is expanding outward.
So that's the matter. So you're saying that there's nothing beyond the matter, the physical matter.
They talk about
space,
the question of whether the universe itself is matter or not is a discussion within physicists. So this was a discussion between Newton and Leibniz. Leibniz believed that actually all that Leibniz, and then afterwards Einstein kind of agreed with Leibniz. Well, basically there was a discussion whether the space of the universe is physical or not. That's a discussion. We don't need to really get into that for this discussion. These are both fine ways of accepting how the universe is composed. What I'm saying is, if you accept the Big Bang theory, if you accept that, then you're saying that the universe began to exist.
Well, no, because there are theories about the oscillatory.
That's what I mean.
Universe.
No, but that's a different
amount of
It's
time.
coming and going.
Fine.
Slowly,
I haven't got a problem with those. I'm just saying that if you're subscribing to the Big Bang theory as we know it, that there was a singularity and then there's an expansion, then you're actually reinforcing the fact that there was a start to the universe.
Well, no, because the expansion began.
So you don't believe in a cause to the universe? You don't believe in a beginning to the universe?
No, I don't believe that.
Well,
okay, fine.
I mean,
no problem.
I don't agree or disagree.
Fine. What I'm going to do now, since you don't agree with a beginning to the universe, that's not a problem. I'll say this doesn't change anything, and I'll tell you why. What there is, classically, there is the Kalam cosmological argument, which is the idea of causality. It's linked to causality. And you're right to suggest that in order for the whole process to work, the secondary stage, which is that the universe had a beginning, would have to be proved. And there is scientific evidence for the fact that the universe had a beginning. Whether that evidence is absolute or not is a good discussion to have. You can't say it's absolute.
No,
Sound good,
not
yeah?
at all, yeah?
So instead of discussing the cosmological argument, which I was just using as kind of like a tangential point actually, I want to discuss the contingency argument, which is actually more, in many ways more impressive. I'll tell you why. If we say that everything that began to exist is dependent upon something else.
Right.
Now, in order for you to reject this premise,
But what is the premise though? I don't quite understand.
okay, everything that began to exist depends upon something else.
In what sense? And how?
In the for its existence, for its existence. So, like for example, I've got a mobile phone, right?
Yeah.
This mobile phone began to exist. Someone made it in a factory somewhere. Now, this mobile phone has a battery inside, and for some reason, they are not allowing us to take the batteries out of the phones nowadays, right? You know this. But anyways, if this phone if the battery depletes and dies, what will be necessary for me to do is put charger inside, yeah? Okay. So in other words, the phone is dependent upon the electricity of the charger in order to be operational.
Yeah.
Okay, no controversies there, hopefully,
That's
yeah?
fine. Yeah.
So the phone is dependent upon the charger.
Yeah.
The charger depends upon some nuclear power plant, and so on and so forth. What I'm saying is that anything that began to exist, like the phone, like yourself, like me and you, like the tree on the background, depends upon something else in order for it to exist. Does that make sense?
It makes sense in using simple objects like your phone and people and grass and trees, but when you're talking about the universe, again, I don't have a sort of strong opinion on what is.
Well,
the
I haven't
cause of
talked
the
about the universe. Fine. Let's not talk.
That's where you're. I see that's
Okay,
where you're going
right.
with it.
Let's not
What's
talk.
a small amount
Let
of
me shift it. Let me shift it one more time. Let me shift it one more time. Let's take away all time element from it. Anything with limited variables depends upon something else. By definition. Anything with limited variables depends upon something else.
What's your definition? What do you mean by limited variables?
Okay, so it's not unlimited in its composition. That's what I mean. So for example, going back to my phone example.
But I think the phone's is not a great answer because it's something that we've created. Let's talk about.
Why isn't? Oh, okay, but it's an entity in existence, right?
Yeah.
So I'm saying that this phone has limited variables.
Yes,
Okay.
we understand. Yeah,
Accepted.
yeah.
So it's not unlimited in its composition.
Yeah.
Now, this thing which has limited variables and is not unlimited in its composition depends upon something else.
I agree.
Okay. Now, what I'm saying is that just like this phone, anything that has limited variables depends upon something else. Now, are you able to find me an example of something that isn't in that category of things?
That isn't
That-
limited.
Something that has limited variables but is independent. In other words, does not depend upon anything else.
Not singular objects, no. But again, I assume where you're going with this is.
No, forget about where we're going.
Well, that's important though, because that.
No, I know it's important, but do you know, an objective mind. Can I be fair
No,
with you
I'm
guys?
agreeing with what you're saying on each stage.
But Sam, can I tell you something? What you're doing here is we're not playing a game of chess, okay?
Sure.
Because if it was a game of chess, okay, you'd be looking at the steps that would potentially come afterwards,
Sure,
right?
I understand you're not trying to trick me into saying-
An objective person, a scientist, a mathematician, a logician, a truth seeker, ought to just look at the premise as it is and try and objectively examine that premise. Then, if you find that that premise is faultless, is not problematic, then we can proceed to the next premise. Now, if you feel like, okay, I don't want to grant my interlocutor this premise, because if I grant my interlocutor this premise, he'll trap me in the next stage, then what that shows is that there's an agenda behind your reasoning. Whereas if you're saying to yourself, look, forget about it,
I
let's
understand.
just...
I understand. So
yeah.
therefore, to answer your original question, there is a possibility that the universe is unlimited.
I'm not talking about the universe is unlimited. I just asked you anything.
therefore there was not
no, just the first
no
premise. Just the first premise here we're talking about. Anything with limited variables depends upon something else in order to exist.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree.
Now, the universe has limited variables.
So I think there is one answer answer that he's maybe missing.
Yes, go ahead, sir. What's your name, first of all?
It's Andy.
How you doing, Andy?
Okay, nice to meet
All three of you now.
Sorry to get
No, I want all the minds to
very
come together.
interested.
Let's bring the minds together.
The thing would be, when you say the phone came into existence,
Yes.
in a way, that's our one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is the waves of
But I've not said that the phone is coming to. That's not my argument. All I've said is that this phone depends upon something else in order to exist. That is my point. So my premise here, guys, and I want you to lose this premise, is that anything with limited variables depends.
I don't understand that bit.
Okay. Limited variables means that it's not unlimited in its composition. Let me give you an easy example, okay?
Isn't there is a finite number of atoms that
Finite number of no, not atoms. I'm just saying finite number of whatever it may be.
or whatever makes up the mass
Whatever
of the
makes up
phone.
this phone,
Yeah.
silicone or whatever it may be, it's finite, right? It's not infinite in its nature, is it? Like, for example, me, I'm composed of blood and tissue and water and all these things, right? But there's a finite number of those variables inside of my physical, biological frame. What I'm saying is that anything with such a description, which is finite in its composition, depends upon something else in order to exist. That's all I'm saying.
So is God, does God have infinite variables?
We're not talking about God. God is out of the discussion at the moment.
Can you think of a thing
And
that
God
has
wouldn't be
finite variables
because
We can
that
talk about
wasn't
God.
brought into
okay, if
existence?
you want to, okay, God, we would say, but what we would say, just to answer that kind of question, is God is not finite. Simple. The definition of God is that He is infinite in His mercy, His knowledge, etc. So He would be not in the category of things that we just described.
I come back to that. Like that tree, is that God? Obviously not. The tree isn't God, so God can't be infinite because He would include the tree. If there's
No.
something that isn't God, surely it's finite, would be my...
Yeah, exactly. So you're right. Something which isn't God is finite. That's correct.
But God isn't the tree,
That's right.
so
Therefore,
he's finite.
he is finite.
No, why would that mean? No, why is that the case?
Well,
If
he's
God isn't
not
the tree, so the tree is finite. So if He wasn't the tree, why would that make Him himself finite?
Well, because therefore
Because
the God
he's
is
something
everything
that-
apart from the tree.
We didn't say He's
Therefore,
everything.
Well, fine, but he's.
Oh yes, actually.
He's what? Oh, okay. Are you saying that He's unlimited in that He's occupying every crevice of creation?
No, that's what I'm suggesting. You almost said. If
No,
he is
we don't believe
unlimited,
that.
it
We don't
includes
believe
everything.
that. That's
think
not our
there's some-
conception of theology, right?
Yeah, there's some. I don't really understand this variable thing, but it just seems to be words. This
Okay,
variable
everything is
thing.
words. If I said to you, listen, every human being is mortal, is that a controversial statement, guys? Really? No. If I said Socrates is a human being, would you have a problem with that? Would you honestly have a problem with that? If I said every human being is mortal, is there a problem?
No.
Is there no problem? Socrates is a human being.
Yes, yes.
He is.
Yes, yeah.
Are you sure?
Well, it was.
He was okay. Well, he was a human being. Yeah.
I mean, if we're being like, yeah.
Right.
If we're
Okay.
being specific, we don't know that for sure.
Therefore, Socrates was mortal. Okay. See how you were able to simply follow the logic in that. There was no controversy. I could have said, listen, hold on. Premise number 2, Socrates, we don't know if he existed or not. I can say that. We only know that Socrates existed through Plato, actually. He hasn't written any of his own books. How do we know he existed? We can't see his tomb. But you just easily went from premise 1 to premise 2 to premise 3.
I think so. Going back to the last sort of step we were at, you said, I think, as far as I'm aware, I agree that anything that has limited variables
Is dependent.
is dependent on something, unless we use this sort of concept where we're all
Yeah.
created from stardust and atoms.
Right.
Therefore, those
Yes.
atoms have
Fine.
united to
So
form
if
a
you
human body, which has
good.
formed a.
So the universe has limited variables. Is that accepted?
That's where I stop.
Okay. Is the universe not in? Is the universe unlimited in its variables? The amount of stars that compose the universe, the amount of black holes that are in the universe, the amount of helium that's in the universe, is that limited or unlimited?
It's unlimited in its.
It's not
It
unlimited.
could be unlimited in its time scope, though.
No, it's not. It's,
Well, that's where we disagree.
I'm just saying that
that's
it's-
where we can't ever know.
first and foremost, we're not talking about time. We're talking about variables, which are independent from time.
Sure, but
But also what you're saying is that they are finite in so much as physical matter that we can register at the moment. What they're moving into, the concept of space, is it truly empty that they're moving into, or is there something there that we can't yet understand?
Whether it's empty, okay, that's good. Whether it's empty or not empty, okay, that's aside the point. Because if they're moving into something, this is actually indicative of the fact that they must be finite by their nature. If the universe is expanding, do you accept the universe is expanding?
Yes.
If you accept that the universe is expanding, then you, by virtue of necessity, actually, must accept that the universe is finite and not infinite. Because it cannot, something which is infinite cannot increase in number and size.
Okay, but
do you understand this point?
Yeah, I understand what you're trying to say.
Okay, but I think going back to the last step that we were at, I suppose a exception to that point is if something has always existed anyway, even if it is limited in its variable.
That's what we're saying. That's begging the question for me. Because I've just said to you that I don't believe such an entity does exist. Because you've made it conditional and then said if something has existed but it's always been there. I'm saying that, where is an example of that?
Just go back to the phone example.
Yes.
So we agreed that this has been, it's the limited variable and that it is caused by something. If this has always existed for eternity.
Yeah, but that if, for me, is a non-relevant if. It's like saying if, there's a multiverse and therefore there's been, this conversation has taken place before, some time in the future. For me, that if is unsubstantiated.
Why?
I can say
Why?
There's an unlimited amount of ifs that I can presuppose to any given situation. We shouldn't use it to block logical pathways from taking place.
It's not blocking. It's not blocking.
Yeah.
We're just using. I'm using the phone. I'm not saying the phone's actually existed forever.
Right.
I'm just saying imagine using it as a metaphorical example.
Okay. Hypothetical.
Imagine the phone has existed for eternity.
Yes.
Although it is limited in its variables. If it has existed for eternity, then nothing has caused it. 'Cause it's always been.
My presupposition.
So nothing needs to cause the phone.
My contention is exactly this.
Yeah.
I'm saying that it's not possible for something with limited variables to forever exist.
Well, that's where.
And without being dependent. In order for that, my contention to be disproved, you'd have to give me a live example.
I don't have to.
Yes, you do. That's how science works, in fact. Science works in falsification terms.
That's not how science works.
Of course it works like that.
It's not.
Of course it is.
Science is, here's a theory.
Yeah.
Let's try and test to see if we can prove it or disprove it.
Yeah, and then what do you put after that?
I have a theory and I cannot prove or disprove it.
Hold on. When you've done that, you put your scientific theory in where?
I've neither proved it, but I haven't disproved it either.
No, that's not the way science works. Science works is, okay, you've got hypothesis, experimentation, and then then you put it into peer-reviewed journals, right? Then it's the job of other scientists to falsify that whatever it is that you put.
Some things you
so
can't
in other,
disprove. Just as we agree, we can't disprove the existence of a God. Therefore, I am not.
No. Now you're conflating the physical and the metaphysical. Here, the physical is where, because science has naturalistic presuppositions. It has a methodological naturalism as its base. In other words, you cannot put under a microscope things which are metaphysical. You can only put under a microscope that which is physical. Now, you've made a statement about physical entities, not metaphysical entities. You talked about the phone, which is actually a physical entity. So I'm saying that my contention today is that we have not yet found in the history of the world an example of something which is limited in its variables, yet independent. And if you have
certainly the whole universe.
We haven't disproved.
We know.
Yeah.
But that's not. Can you prove that it's independent?
This theory, energy matter can't be created or destroyed.
No, I'm saying. So you're saying matter cannot. That's within the circle of the universe.
Yes.
Within the circle of the universe.
Yes.
that So that once again wouldn't apply.
Okay. So just.
Within it's a closed circle.
Sorry.
So the context in which that. That which what you said, energy can't be created, would only work within the circuit of the universe. Yes. So if the universe came into existence.
No one says it did.
Pardon?
There's no one saying it did come into existence.
No, if the universe came, so it's just always been there in your mind.
Yes.
That's where the contention is.
Oh, okay,
We're
all right.
suggesting.
All right, fine. So fine. Even if you say that the universe has always been there,
Yeah.
you still have to recognize that the universe is composed of a limited amount of variables.
I sort of see where you're it seems almost as if you're just doing the cause argument.
It's not a cause. This is called this is the contingency argument. So here, the contingency
I
argument.
agree with you. I agree that I believe that the universe is contained of limited variables. I think.
Okay, good. So if we go to the next stage now, because we don't want to spend too much time.
Sure.
If that's the case, if the universe is composed of limited variables, number one. Number two, and that which has, number one, that which is limited in its variables depends upon something else. Number two,
we decided we didn't agree with that.
Why? Have you got anything to prove it? Disprove it?
Yes, just the universe.
No, I can't prove or disprove it.
If you can't, okay,
that's
so
why I said at the
so
start
that's
of
what
the
I'm saying.
conversation.
But you see,
I don't know.
If you say you can't prove or disprove of it,
Yeah.
then
It doesn't mean it's not true.
No, hold on. That's not good enough to dismiss it. Let me give you an example. If I say to you here that the Big Bang Theory itself, yeah?
Right.
Do you accept it? Whatever. You say, look, I might be able to prove, I can't prove or disprove it. I've got evidence for it, but I can't prove or disprove it. That sentence, I cannot prove or disprove it, is applicable to almost everything. Is applicable to almost everything.
Yeah.
And you can use that sentence to get away from believing in anything. Now, what I'm saying to you today is that you can continue saying this to yourself, and I believe it's self-delusion, by the way. If you say, I can't prove or disprove this, I'm not going to believe, I believe that's a form of self-delusion. If you can find an example, if I can find you 1 billion examples using induction of something being the case for a reason, that's good reason to accept it. That's how science works. You accept science, you go to the doctor when you're ill. I'm saying that in the physical world, anything that you see which has limited amount of variables is dependent upon something else. I have 1 billion examples of that. Any example you want to give around us is an example of that. Anything around, in fact, is an example of that. You're saying, well, we can't prove or disprove. The same induction that you use to prove your own existence, or the same induction that you use to prove almost anything that you believe in, you've rejected here. But why?
Okay, so
do you see what I mean?
I could give you 1 billion examples of plants that are green.
Yes.
Every plant, as far as I'm aware, has an element of green.
That's a false dichotomy here.
But you're saying that if you went...
but I can get you a blue plant.
Let me finish. If you went 1 billion miles away and went to a planet which had life, based on that reasoning, you would say they must have, their plants will be green. Because I have 1 billion examples.
This is David Hume's whole white swan example, sorry. David Hume's white swan example is exactly this. If you say I've seen 100 swans, all of the swans are white, yeah? I see 1 black swan, I've disproved the thesis that all swans are white. I'm saying to you that everything around us in this universe, which has limited variables, including the universe itself, which has limited variables, is contingent on something else for its existence. It's dependent upon something else.
We disagree with that.
So if you have one example that disproves this thesis, you've done exactly what someone would have done if they found 1 black swan. If you haven't found the black swan, you cannot say that black swans exist.
Yes, but you also cannot prove that the black swan doesn't exist.
Yes, okay, fine. But then if you use that same methodology, this is why I'll be honest with you guys. Can I be honest?
No, I know you've already said.
Can I be honest? I want to be honest. Listen,
Yeah.
This is my honest truth here.
Yeah.
I sometimes with atheists, right? I feel sometimes there's a double standard in their approach. I'll be honest with you, right? Maybe you can correct me, and please do correct me, yeah? I believe that, for example, simple induction, which you would accept in almost any other context, when it comes to the discussion of theology, you reject it. Even if that induction is plentiful, is incredible in its number, you will still reject it. I don't see the reason why you should reject it. You see, look.
I don't see why it's plentiful.
Well,
if we find many examples of one thing, okay?
I'm yet to find one when it comes to sort of, I guess, what you're trying to argue in terms of theology.
No, I'm saying, look, you have to follow the logic. I'm saying I've made a point today, guys. The point I've made is that anything with limited variables depends upon something else in order for it to exist. Now, I'm saying everything that you can see around you is an example of that. Now, if I have 1 billion tried and tested, yes, 1 billion, 1 trillion tried and tested examples of something in the scientific world from day dot until this day, yeah, and that was put into any kind of scientific journal, it would be seen as a very strong type of science. Not any kind of science. It would be seen as a very strong kind of science. My question is, why do you not accept what I'm saying to be a strong argument if we would accept it with anything else? Why?
For me, I'm still on this thing of the phone. It didn't.
So some people say that the way to prove Islam true is through the scientific miracles of the Qur'an.
Today is the age of science and technology. So let us analyze today whether this glorious Qur'an is compatible or incompatible to modern science. It gave rise to galaxies, the stars, the planets, the sun, the moon, and the earth on which we live. This they call as the Big Bang. The glorious Qur'an mentions this in a nutshell 1400 years ago in Surah Anbiya, chapter number 21, verse number 30.
And other people say that the way to prove Islam false is through the scientific errors in the Qur'an.
The Quran repeatedly tells us in the clearest of terms that the earth was created first before the heavens. Quran verse 229, He it is who created for you all that is in the earth, then turned he to the heaven, and fashioned it as 7 heavens, and he is knower of all things.
These are two approaches which depend upon certain presuppositions and assumptions about science, and also a reading or a misreading of the tafsir. What we're going to be doing, Abu Safia, in these
we are going to be taking these ayat, inshallah ta'ala, all of these verses, and looking at them through a classical lens, how the scholars of Islam viewed it, how it was interpreted by the companions, by the best of the generations, and to see whether or not what principles we should be applying here in relation to the Quran and modern day scientific theory.
So join me and Abu Safia in our series reacting to Zakir Naik's Miracles of the Quran narrative.